The wind scraped across the desolate plains of Nithra 9, carrying with it the metallic stench of ancient war. Shattered starship hulls jutted from the blackened soil like the bones of titans. Beneath one broken wing, a heat signature flickered faintly, a living being. The dragon stirred among the ruins, her obsidian scales glimmering under the pale light of Nithra's fractured moon. Her nostrils flared. The scent of blood, faint but unmistakable, wound its way through the cold air and coiled around her mind like a command from her ancestors. Hunger tightened her throat. It had been 12 days since she had last eaten, and the hunger had sharpened her instincts into something close to madness. She descended silently, wings folding against her sides to muffle their sound. Her claws gripped the charred ground, leaving grooves in the ash. Through the shattered panels of the wreck, she saw him, a human, moving weakly, dragging himself across the debris. His suit was torn, his shoulder marked with a fresh red smear. The pulse of his heart echoed faintly through her neural sensors, even her kind, born from flesh and machine, could hear it. Her maw opened slightly, vents glowing with internal heat. This was the moment every cell in her body craved. And then he turned. He didn't scream or run. His eyes, pale, glassy, and weary, met hers with a strange calm. The dragon paused mid-stride. The air between them shimmered from the static charge building in her chest, but his expression remained almost bored. Then, with a tone so absurd it made her neural core hesitate, he said, "Relax, it's just my lunch." She froze, the words incomprehensible but the tone disarming. He raised a small metal packet, ripped it open, and the smell that filled the air was not blood but synthetic protein, thick and iron-scented. The dragon blinked, confused. Her senses adjusted, parsing the chemical composition. The blood she smelled was processed, artificial. He was not prey. Not bleeding. Just eating. She exhaled, a cloud of steam rippling from her nostrils. The tension in her limbs remained, but something alien stirred in her, curiosity. The human took another bite, watching her with a faint, incredulous smile. The wind howled through the wreckage, scattering sparks from old plasma residue. For the first time in her existence, the dragon hesitated before a kill. Her programming and instincts warred silently inside her. Hunger demanded she strike. Logic whispered that this one was different. The human spoke again, his words slow, his tone calm, as if addressing a wild creature instead of facing certain death. His voice vibrated through her sensors, soft yet steady. She didn't understand the language, but she recognized intent, non-threatening, almost companionable. The ruined battlefield around them hummed with the echoes of old machines, a symphony of ghosts and static. She lowered her head, inches from him, the glow of her inner fire painting his pale face in amber light. He didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his hand slowly and placed the ration pack between them. The gesture was clear enough. Share. The dragon's claws tightened against the ground, the ancient bloodlust whispering in her core. But she did not strike. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the hunger and the heat, a strange new directive sparked to life, one not written in instinct or code. She wanted to understand. The dragon watched him through the fractured hull, her golden eyes reflecting the dim blue light of a dying reactor core. The human sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor, eating with the same composure one might have in a home kitchen, not the graveyard of a fallen fleet. The smell of synthetic meat mixed with ozone from the wreck's exposed circuits. He looked fragile, thin, exhausted, patched up in a survival suit that was older than the war itself. Yet, there was a steadiness to him, a rhythm that defied fear. It disturbed her. Prey should tremble. They should scream. He only hummed softly as he ate. She crept closer, claws scraping the scorched metal, and his head turned toward the sound. He didn't move away. His voice came again, soft, calm, incomprehensible, but almost soothing in its cadence. She could pick up the tones in his speech through her audio sensors, each vibration mapped and analyzed by the ancient processor fused into her spine. The sounds carried no aggression. He spoke as if she were a companion, not a predator. The dragon's instincts flared and faded in rapid pulses. Her hunger algorithm spiked again, the energy reserves in her plasma core were dangerously low. One breath of fire would cost her hours of survival. She calculated the human's mass, compared it to her needs, and paused. Something was wrong. He wasn't behaving like prey, and her logic thread, buried deep beneath instinct, kept rerouting. This one might be useful. The human pulled a small device from his belt, a hollow emitter. It flickered weakly, projecting a faded image, a woman's face, human, smiling. His eyes softened as he looked at it. For a moment, the battlefield around them ceased to exist, there was only that fragile memory of warmth. The dragon tilted her head. She had seen such behavior in her kind once, long ago, before the Great Purge, before her hive fell. They too had looked to holograms of their creators when the hunger came. He noticed her gaze and lifted the hollow, showing it to her as if introducing a friend. "My wife," he said, the sound carrying something even her alien mind could understand, grief. She blinked slowly, exhaling a low rumble that vibrated the air. The human smiled faintly at the sound. Hours passed like that, each testing the other's boundaries. When night fell, twin moons rose above the ruins, their pale light spilling across twisted engines and burned soil. The dragon curled her tail around the wreck, half as a barrier, half as a signal. The human lay near the faint warmth of her body, trusting a creature that could end him in a heartbeat. She stared at him until the stars blurred. Deep within her mechanical heart, the processors that once guided her to hunt now whispered in strange tones of curiosity. She could feel his heartbeat through the ground, steady and fearless. It was unlike anything she had known. Hunger still coiled in her gut, but now, mixed with it, something impossible took root, an interest, a data pattern beyond instinct or logic. The predator was learning hesitation. The hunter was beginning to listen. Days bled together beneath the fractured skies of Nithra 9. The human had repaired a few of the wreck's energy cells, enough to power dim lights and a heat emitter. The dragon had taken to lying nearby, half within the shadows, her scales catching glimmers of light like black glass. She no longer watched him as prey but as something unfamiliar, an anomaly in the pattern of her existence. His presence disrupted the cold algorithms of instinct that had defined her species for centuries. He spent hours talking, even though he knew she couldn't understand. Words, gestures, fragments of songs, his voice became a constant hum in the silence of the wasteland. Sometimes, he would point to things, a star in the red sky, the edge of her wings, a broken engine still humming faintly. He gave names to everything, assigning language to chaos. She didn't know what the words meant, but she began to recognize his tone when he was amused, when he was tired, when he was simply talking to keep the loneliness away. When the storms came, thick with static dust, he would shelter beneath the dragon's wings, and she would let him. The radiation sensors in her scales absorbed the worst of it, creating a shimmering blue barrier above them. He had once called her Ashra. The name meant nothing in her tongue, her species didn't name individuals, but it carried sound, rhythm, identity. When he said it, her internal processors vibrated with recognition. One evening, as he scavenged through the wreckage for components, he uncovered a damaged drone core. The dragon lowered her head, curious, watching as he rewired it with trembling hands. Sparks flew. When the drone flickered to life, it emitted a low harmonic sound. She responded instinctively with a pulse from her own chest cavity, two distinct frequencies resonating for a moment in harmony. The human looked up, startled, then smiled as if he understood. The first bridge between them had been built not from words, but from sound. Later, he cooked one of his ration packs on a small plasma flame and held it up toward her. She hesitated, nostrils flaring. The chemical scent was strange, artificial, but not unpleasant. He placed it gently on the ground and stepped back. She extended her neck, touched the food with the tip of her tongue, and felt the synthetic proteins dissolve. For the first time, she tasted something made by human hands, and did not reject it. As night deepened, the storm cleared, revealing the stars. He traced constellations in the air with his fingers, naming them as he spoke. She watched in silence, her eyes reflecting entire galaxies. Somewhere deep inside her neural core, a dormant sequence stirred, an ancient program meant to catalog intelligent life. But this time, it wasn't activation by command or data. It was something far older, something that resembled choice. The dragon lowered her massive head beside the human's small campfire, her breathing slow and deliberate. He sat beside her, whispering softly into the night. The ruins hummed with the echo of forgotten wars, but for the first time, the world around them felt alive. And beneath that alien sky, predator and prey became something entirely new, companions in defiance of nature itself. The nights had grown colder, and the wreckage creaked like a dying ship still drifting through vacuum. Ashra had grown used to the sound of his breathing, the rhythmic pulse that told her he was alive. Every morning he rose before the twin suns broke the horizon, scavenging for power cells, transistors, or anything that might bring the wreck's long-dead systems to life. She watched him climb through the twisted metal, his fragile figure moving with purpose. Humans were strange, she thought, so fragile, yet unwilling to surrender. That morning, when the air trembled with static, Ashra felt it before he did. A faint vibration, not from the planet's storms but from above. She lifted her head sharply, scanning the red sky. Her optical sensors detected a faint trace, ion signatures descending in slow spirals. The human noticed her sudden stillness and followed her gaze. Then, the sound came, a low, mechanical hum that didn't belong to the wind. He ran inside the wreck, pulling open a rusted control panel, fingers trembling with disbelief. A signal, he murmured, though she couldn't understand the word. The holodisplay flickered to life, a faint beacon pulsing on the screen, an orbital drone. His people. They were scanning the planet again after decades of silence. His eyes lit with something she hadn't seen before, hope. Ashra lowered her wings and stepped closer, the ground trembling beneath her weight. Hope, for her, meant danger. Wherever humans came, they brought war machines, steel and fire. Her kind had learned that lesson long ago. The faint pulse in the clouds grew brighter as the drone descended, scanning the surface with ultraviolet sweeps. She felt the heat on her scales. The human, realizing she was uneasy, raised his hands in reassurance, speaking her name softly, as though that could undo what the sky had already set in motion. He didn't know the old codes hidden in her neural core. His signal flare, the one he launched with trembling joy, was a call to more than his people, it was a broadcast across all surviving networks. She could read its encryption pattern now, threads of human military code that recognized her species as hostile remnants. The next wave would not bring rescue. It would bring extermination. The air shuddered again, and a beam of light cut through the clouds. The dragon instinctively shielded him beneath her wing, her sensors ringing with heat warnings. He looked up, confused, thinking she was afraid. But it wasn't fear, it was memory. She remembered the orbital strikes, the firestorms that had turned her brood into glass. When the light faded, he was silent. His hand touched her wing, the same way one might touch a wall before a storm breaks. They both knew something irreversible had begun. The signal had been seen. Something vast was coming. The night that followed was restless. The dragon stood guard over the camp, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the stars had shifted slightly, unnaturally. The human slept near the warmth of her body, unaware that every pulse in the distance was not just the echo of a beacon, but the sound of fate approaching. And Ashra, once predator, now protector, watched the sky with a hunger that had changed its shape, no longer for survival, but for the chance to defy destiny one last time. The sky broke open 2 days later. The drone's faint signal had become a storm of descending engines, dark shapes cutting through the clouds like blades. Ashra felt them before she saw them, their sonic tremors crawling across her scales, echoing deep into the alloyed marrow of her bones. The human stood beside her, shielding his eyes as the light of re-entry burned the horizon. He had thought salvation was coming. Now, as the ships pierced the atmosphere, his expression faltered. Ashra spread her wings, a motion that sent dust spiraling around them. The neural links in her spine lit like molten veins, memories of battle sequences flooding through her dormant circuits. She knew this pattern, the approach of an eradication unit. The same sound had haunted her hatch years ago, when the sky fell and her kind burned. "Wait," he shouted, stepping toward her, his voice rising against the wind. "They won't harm you. I can explain." She couldn't understand the words, but she read his tone, the desperate rhythm of denial. He still believed the world worked like his stories, where reason prevailed, where monsters could be understood. But Ashra knew better. The human fleets did not ask questions. They erased threats. The first plasma strike hit the far ridge, vaporizing the sand into molten glass. The sound rolled across the plain like thunder. Ashra moved without thought, her body a weapon older than the human wars. She roared, a sound that shattered the silence of centuries. The rescuers answered with fire. Bolts of blue energy tore through the air, and the ground erupted around them. The human dove for cover, shouting into his broken comlink, his voice lost in static. One beam hit closer, grazing her side. She turned, pain flaring through her neural web. For a moment, the old instinct surged: kill, burn, devour. She inhaled, plasma cores charging, but stopped when she saw him. He was standing between her and the soldiers, waving his arms, screaming words she couldn't translate. Blood trickled down his arm where shrapnel had torn through his suit. The scent of it struck her like a pulse of lightning. Real blood this time. The hunger roared awake, an old, savage programming meant to ensure survival. She trembled, fighting it, her claws sinking into the soil. Every part of her wanted to lunge, to silence the smell. But his eyes, those strange, human eyes, held her still. They were not afraid, even now. They carried the same defiance she had seen when he first spoke to her among the ruins. "Relax," that voice seemed to echo again, soft and absurd. "It's just my lunch." The phrase meant nothing, but its sound struck her like memory. Something inside her, older than instinct, deeper than programming, shifted. The scent of his blood no longer called her to feed, it called her to protect. The next blast was aimed at him. She moved before she could think, wings flaring, plasma shields unfolding like molten glass. The missile struck her side, the shockwave ripping through flesh and circuitry. She didn't scream, the sound was too vast for that. She only looked down at him one last time, the light of the explosion reflecting in her fading eyes. He shouted her name as she fell, his hands pressed against her cooling scales. The sky burned again above them, but Ashra no longer saw it. She had rewritten the law of her kind in a single act, choosing loyalty over hunger, empathy over code. And as her massive form collapsed beside him, the battlefield went quiet, leaving only the crackle of cooling metal and the heartbeat of one human who finally understood what it meant to be seen by a monster who refused to be one. Silence fell over the battlefield after the light faded. The air was heavy with the scent of ionized metal and scorched dust. The human staggered forward, his body trembling from exhaustion and the concussion wave. Ashra lay beside him, her massive frame half buried beneath shards of blackened steel. Steam rose from her wounds, hissing faintly as it met the cold air. Her once glowing eyes had dimmed to a faint ember, flickering with every fading pulse of her core. He pressed his hands against her side, shouting words that dissolved into the emptiness around them. His voice cracked, raw and desperate. He didn't know if she could still hear him. Her breathing was shallow, more mechanical than organic now, a broken rhythm of sparks and sighs. Then, faintly, her chest rose. The sound that left her throat wasn't a growl or a roar, it was something soft, an exhale that rippled through the dust. Her gaze met his. The faint light in her eyes caught his reflection, small, fragile, defiant. He whispered her name, the one he had given her, as if it could hold her here a little longer. For a moment, her pupils constricted, focusing on him. Somewhere within the labyrinth of her fading mind, she understood. The human, the prey, had become the one thing her kind had never known, an equal. He felt the vibration through the ground before he saw it, the rescue craft descending, engines whining, soldiers fanning out in formation. They moved cautiously, weapons raised, scanning the fallen creature. He rose to his feet, shouting, his voice sharp with fury. "She saved me." The soldiers hesitated, confusion flashing in their visors. Their orders had not prepared them for this, a human defending a dragon. Ashra tried to move, but her strength was gone. The human knelt beside her again, pressing his palm against her cooling scales. "You're safe now," he whispered, knowing the lie for what it was. Her last breath left her body in a tremor of heat and sound. For a fleeting second, her eyes brightened once more, one final surge of energy. Then, slowly, the light went out. The following weeks passed in fragments. The soldiers extracted him from the ruins, debriefed him, questioned every word of his story. They found no threat, no evidence of a functioning hive. Only the remains of a single dragon whose neural patterns, once translated, showed traces of something their machines could not classify, emotion. Years later, in the reconstructed colonies of the Outer Rim, a file began to circulate. A grainy recording recovered from Nithra 9. In it, a weary man sat beside a massive, motionless form under a storm-lit sky. He looked into the camera, voice low but steady. Her name was Ashra. She wasn't a monster. She was the reason I'm still alive. The file ended with the image of the dragon's eyes glowing faintly one last time as lightning split the horizon. No one could say if it was a malfunction or something else entirely. But among the settlers and soldiers who watched, a single truth spread quietly through the colonies, that on a dead world where war had erased everything, a predator once chose mercy. And in that act, something greater than survival was born.